Who could have thought something so grey could be so wonderful? The PlayStation, or PS1 as it's retrospectively called now, was a wonderful machine. And here is a collection of videos chronicling a smorgasbord of different games licenses that I've covered from that machine. There's some movies in there, there's a wrestling game in there, there's even a strip bar in there. There are more videos I've done based on the PlayStation 1 on the rest of the channel, but I'll get to them another day. Let's have a look at some of the earlier ones I did. First up, one of the worst games I've ever played, and you'll be able to tell from the intro just when I played it. I'll see you at the end. Oh, look, it's a game about a virus. Oh, I can sense big YouTube views with this. I'll be trending on that algorithm, so I will. Oh, what can I say? Oh, what about all those people buying all that alcohol gel, eh? Yeah? And the toilet roll? Bad people, aren't they? And going to the beach in May? Disgraceful. Oh, yeah. The lockdown. Oh, it's boring, isn't it? Oh, this lockdown. Oh, it's so boring. I might get that Joe Wicks on the telly and do like a press-up or something. Oh, yeah. Oh, and what about that Dominic Cummings fella, huh? Oh, what about him, eh? What about that Dominic Cummings? He shouldn't have gone there, should he? Not to Barnard Castle. Eye tests. Ooh, eye tests. Yes. Oh, I'm a bit late, aren't I? Bugger. Virus was a 1999 horror movie with sci-fi elements based on a comic book. Back in 1999, a movie based on a comic book was still a bit of a novelty, rather than the entire multiplex lineup for the last decade. Virus was a Dark Horse comic first published in 1992, which tells the story of an alien life form taking over a research vessel in the sea. The life form configures the very cellular structure of the ship's electronics and carcasses of the crew, turning them into horrific organic metal mutant monsters. Ew. So it's a bit like a Thing in many respects. A salvage ship then arrives, and the poor seamen, have to fight to survive. The 1999 movie adaptation follows the storyline quite closely, starring Donald Sutherland, the least popular Baldwin brother, Willie Yum Yum, and Jamie Lee Curtis, who is both an incredible actress and scream queen, but also a moment of awakening to many 80s kids who stayed up late night to watch Trading Places on the telly. You know the scene I'm talking about. She's got nice boobies. Even Jamie Lee Curtis and her lovely breasts cannot save Virus, though. It was a critical and commercial flop. That's why it's here in this series about flop movies that had games. Based on nearly 50 reviews, the film has had a rather pathetic aggregate score of 12% on Rotten Tomatoes, with a lot of reviewers calling it out for being a derivative and unoriginal clone of the already not very good Deep Rising, released a year prior. Even Jamie Lee herself stated in an interview with IGN that Virus was an all-time piece of shit, just dreadful. I don't think she did it on the press tour. I think this was a review after it. I mean, that would be pretty unprofessional, wouldn't it? The movie took a measly $30.7 million back from its $75 million budget, but it has seen a small, ironic fan base build it up to be a bit of a cult classic, which means it's a bad film generally, isn't it? A cult classic. Everyone watch Shakma instead. That's got a baboon with an erection that tries to get through doors. Don't watch Virus. Incredibly, this film had a series of action figures released about it, which is, I find, amazing. I bet they didn't sell well, though. So the movie's really bad. How about the game? Surely it can't be any worse.
I've never been so wrong in all my life.
Cryo Interactive, from the country they often call France due to that being its name in English, developed and self-published the tie-in game for the year of the movie's release, that being 1999. It came out only in Europe, denying those in the rest of the world their chance to play along with their favourite Billy Baldwin moments from the movie, like none of them at all. And that's not me slating the movie or the acting of William Baldwin, because Christ knows both of those have been done to death already, including by me just about a minute ago. The game does not follow the plotline of either the Dark Horse comic or the movie which shares its name. The game, rather than spend its entire length on a high seas adventure of terror, supplants the grim little tale and its body horror to the confines of a rather familiarly sounding Nakomi Hotel. Sounds like the Nakatomi Plaza, isn't it? Or at least it does for the opening half of the game. The ship of woe has docked, you see, which doesn't happen in the movie thanks to the efforts of Jamie Lee Curtis and the crew. So it's not so much a movie adaptation, but more of a sequel to events that didn't actually happen in the movie. So what was the reason behind this decision? Well, apparently, Cryo thought that the interior of a ship would be too limited for an action-adventure game on the PlayStation. It's a wise choice, as who'd want to play a game in tight, drab, grey-looking corridors that look really similar for its entire duration? That would be terrible, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it? Wouldn't it? When you eventually leave the hotel, you end up on the Electra ship from the original story, which looks and plays radically different. Doesn't it? Doesn't it? Doesn't it? You take control of Joan, a female police officer partnered in this one-player action adventure by her regular right-hand colleague Sutter, who appears whenever the game feels it's convenient for him to be there for the plot. The rest of the time, he's dashing off, doing his own thing, just like Rebecca and Barry in Resident Evil. Resident Evil, while we're on the subject, is definitely an inspiration here, right down to the clunky tank controls, the pre-rendered backdrops, and the legions of undead. It's just a shame that it's massively inferior than Capcom's stellar effort. A reminder, as you're looking at footage from this game, that this came out in 1999. That's after Resident Evils 1 and 2, it's after Silent Hill, it's after Tomb Raiders 1, 2 and 3, it's after Metal Gear Solid, and it is out after things like Siphon Filter and Soul Reaver. It looks and plays like a game that has ignored advancements made by those titles in the 5 years since the birth of the PlayStation 1. This is Fade to Black territory here, and that feels like I'm doing Fade to Black a huge disservice, because although that game wasn't great, it's a great deal better than Virus. Controls are obstinately limited, with no crouch, ineffective strafing, no targeting, and really slow response times, leaving little variety in how to dispatch the enemies. Enemies that have to be eliminated before you can exit a room. Over and over and over again. That is the entire gameplay of Virus, it is aware. The encounters with the beasts are more infuriating than scary, with the taser stun gun sometimes just deciding not to respond at all as the legions descend upon you. A particularly hilarious moment happens a third through the hotel, as a security guard announces in horror that the semi-metal monsters have been falling through the ceiling. Yes, I know, mister, they've been doing that for the entire game so far. Virus is pretty damned wretched. It's the same tawdry graphics doing the same rinse and repeat gameplay over and over again. This is the biggest stinker I have played so far in this series. What did the gaming press have to say about it? Well, the official PlayStation magazine in their issue 48 declared it as badly designed and sloppily executed. Not even a poor man's Resident Evil, just poor. A 4 out of 10 from them. The French equivalent of the official PlayStation magazine, just called PlayStation magazine, gave it a lowly 1 out of 10. Oof. So yes, Virus, it is aware. Well, if you're aware, you should be rightly ashamed of yourself and be trying to eliminate yourself using a vaccine of some description. As rubbish as wearing a mask on your chin and having a coughing fit in a supermarket queue in the spring of 2020. It's as disgusting as that. Like, subscribe, and Kate thanks, bye. Who wants to be a millionaire? Well, do you? Why? You'll never be any happier. You're still going to die, just fatter and surrounded by more tat and with a few more opportunities to get tanned in nice places. We should all forget about winning money on these shows. Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was a phenomenon around the time of the millennium. It was a terse appointment television, despite, in essence, being probably the most simplified quiz format of all. No need for big steel wheels, giant cards, CG yellow goons larking about on a massive screen, or smiling glamour puss dolly birds. It was 2 chairs, a host, a contestant, some dramatic lighting, and a lot of nervous pregnant pauses for effect. It's 15 multiple choice questions with 3 bailout options should the contestant begin to struggle to get the answers out of his brain. And those are in the form of phone a friend, ask the audience, and 50-50. There's nothing else to this game. That's all there is. Initially presented by Chris Tarrant, who sort of resembles a concentration camp surviving Boris Johnson, it had a lengthy first run of 16 years, from 1998 to 2014. It was a ITV institution produced by Celador, who were also the company behind Slumdog Millionaire, which, yes, was the Oscar-winning movie about an Indian who wants to be a millionaire contestant. In its first run, it hit a ratings high of 19 million viewers, which on one occasion resulted in a 60% TV share and gave the BBC a record low rating on the other side. Interest eventually dwindled to where it inevitably drew just a couple of million viewers. That was in the mid-2010s. It has returned recently with genial car grump Jeremy Clarkson hosting, but it's unlikely to have anything like the reach or success of the original. But it was a huge success across the globe in the 2000s. Look at this map. Look at it, crikey. No, it's not a map of places Britain has invaded. It is a map of how many places that have had the show. From Afghanistan to Vietnam, plucky upstarts have walked upon a shiny stage and been asked increasingly difficult general knowledge questions in pursuit of a million of whatever that country's currency is. With a series as successful as this, it won't surprise you that there was a video game. It might surprise you that there were this many. You've got 2nd editions, 3rd editions, junior editions, American editions, Irish editions, Japanese editions, Tiger Electronic Game editions, European editions, versions for a diverse range of formats, from the DVD player, 6 of those in fact, to the DS, to the Xbox Series, to the Apple Mac, to the Switch, every single PlayStation apart from the Vita, and even one released in 2021 for the PlayStation 5. Can you believe there's been that many versions of this? If you want to answer 15 general knowledge questions, well, they've largely got you covered. The first version of this game was a 1999 Windows release based on the Regis Philbin presented American edition of the show. That was published by Disney Interactive and saw its second version converted to the Game Boy Color, PlayStation 1 and 2, and the Apple Mac in America. But we're not covering that version today. No, we're going to cover the UK edition, which came out on the Dreamcast, the PlayStation, and Windows in 2000. But also there was a version converted by Zoo Digital to the Game Boy Advance 2 years later. Now, Zoo Digital were a part of Eidos, and Eidos released the original game. It was programmed by Hot House Entertainment, and it's curiously one of the country's most successful games of all time. Yes, in the same way Avatar is the most successful movie of all time, but no one really cares about that blue space sex pervert opera anymore, this was probably in your PlayStation 1 library. It was, by some distance, the best-selling game in the year 2000 in the UK, outselling the likes of Gran Turismo 2, Pokemon Yellow, Blue and Red, FIFA 2001, Driver 2, WWF Smackdown 2, Tony Hawk's 2 and The Sims. It was the first game to sell 1 million copies in the UK. It still holds the record for the most consecutive weeks at number 1 in the UK All Formats chart at 18, and it's a figure that no doubt was helped by the occasional stock shortages of the Grand Theft Auto series in the PlayStation 2 era. Those games were huge. And it's this, a very faithful version of the TV show. It has the dramatic music, it has the scene changes, it has every single round, including the initial contestant selecting fastest finger first section in multiplayer, which now, weirdly enough, has its own separate quiz show on daytime television that acts as a sort of a precursor to the Clarkson revival, which I think's a bit strange because that wasn't a thing back in the Chris Tarrant era. The game starts at the £100 question, a question that has all the innate difficulty of staring at a woodlouse for a second. You then answer as many questions as your brain box will squeeze out before it gives up coughing and spent. You've still got the same lifelines, complete with correct jingles, only this time you don't actually phone a friend with the phone a friend option. After all, if you're playing a 22-year-old PlayStation quiz game like I am, there's a good chance your call list is a tad light. Instead, the game provides a friend for you that, unlike the TV show, shouldn't be your last preserved lifeline, as it guesses wildly when you get past the 100,000 question range. You can also choose, hilariously really, to conserve the money you've accrued by tapping out at any point, even though the money is not actually real. Why would you not gamble your £0? Graphically, it's fine. The pre-rendered set is eerily empty, with the chairs apparently gaining consciousness and playing the game while being watched by other empty chairs in the audience. Maybe there was a visit to the Who Wants To Be a Millionaire studio by the Magic Circle, who burnt so many magic farts into the upholstery that they've given life to them, like the mop in Fantasia. I'd argue that this is the right choice. It's probably better this than having Chris Tarrant rendered in PlayStation 1 era polygons. Ugh. Chris Tarrant's voice does appear, but not to read the questions, and the European version swapped out Mr. Tarrant for whoever their host of their TV show was. There's likely not enough questions to have you play this every day for the rest of your life, but you're not going to want to, I suspect, and it's certainly going to give you more lasting appeal than, say, the board game version or a quiz game on the ZX Spectrum. I can assure you of that, having played many. When the game launched, a smart piece of marketing saw one lucky purchaser scoop £1 million as a prize. That's very apropos. Disappointingly though, it wasn't based on you completing the game, and was instead a bit of paper on which you'd have to organise your preference of things you'd spend your winnings on, which then a judge or something would decide was the right order. Weird. It's highly unlikely that £1 million would buy you all of this stuff anyway. Who Wants To Be a Millionaire is, in many respects, the perfect TV licence. It captures the tension well and is visually on point. The gameplay, though, well, that's where it lets itself down. It's exactly the same format as the show itself. It perfectly achieved what it set out to do, but that doesn't necessarily make it a great game. Its simple format makes it extremely light on content, and so it's a short-lived experience. As we play it here in 2020, with easy internet access becoming a standard in households as water and electricity, you may find the temptation to ace the harder questions a little bit too hard to resist. You big cheaty Charles Ingram. But that's not quite the game's fault. It is what it is, and if it did any more, it would not be true to the licence. It would be doing the licence a disservice. So, sorry if you're expecting a platformer or one-on-one fighter starring Chris Tarrant. But that's not going to happen. And that, unfortunately, is my final answer. Magazine and website reviews understood this core problem well. Eurogamer said in their 50% rated review that families are going to feel ripped off paying full price for a game with the appeal of a budget title. Come a couple of weeks and you'll have forgotten about it. CNVG criticised the amount of questions in their November 2000 issue and ultimately offered that it's about as much fun as cleaning your teeth with an electric drill. Please don't try that at home. France. We all know about France, don't we? They have long bread, long landmarks like the Eiffel Tower, long affairs, ashtrays full of cigarette butts, films with nudity in, and they really love generalisations based on absolutely nothing. I've been 3 whole times, so I'm like the expert on France. I mean, going to Disneyland twice counts, doesn't it? But yes, this is a film that doesn't feature nudity, which is good, because it's called The City of Lost Children. Now, you don't want nudity in something with the name of City of Lost Children, do you? Unless you like being on a register. Even the adults in the movie wouldn't look great nude. I mean, one of them is Ron Perlman. Who wants to see Ron Perlman nude? Apart from Ron Perlman's wife, I guess. City of Lost Children was a 1995 film directed by Jean-Pierre Jeunet and Marc Corot, a pair who collaborated on such internationally regarded classics as Delicatessen, Amélie, A Very Long Engagement, and Alien Resurrection. Yeah. A steampunk-styled science fiction film finds a nasty scientist called Crank, who uses technology to siphon the dreams out of children to reverse the ageing process. Oh, if that's all you do, I'll get my laptop out when my son's asleep. I need to reverse the amount of hair going down the plug hole. He doesn't need dreams anyway. These children are snatched by a cyborg cult who get upgrades from Dr. Dreamsnatcher in exchange for metal add-ons to their eyes and whatnot. We follow a cute orphaned junior called Miette as she teams up with a crew of outcasts to bring down the sea-based Crank and his selfish REM ruining ways. City of Lost Children was a visually arresting effort and now a beloved cult classic, but while it did alright in France, it did not do well internationally, making just $1.75 million in the States, and not much more than that in the rest of the world. A disappointing total then for its still relatively modest $18 million budget. Its tomato meter average is set at 79% from 57 reviews. However, its audience meter is 90% from over 50,000 reviews, which just goes to show that people did love it, but not enough to go and scoff popcorn in a dark room in 1995. The game of City of Lost Children was released in 1996 on the PlayStation and MS-DOS in its native France, with the translated versions following for the rest of the world in 1997. Psygnosis began programming the video game in 1994 using a set location visit to study the movie's environments and get an idea of what scenes to use in their adventure title. They modelled the city using a combination of 3D Studio, Deluxe Paint and Photoshop. The process apparently took a huge month per location to render each scene because mid-90s tech was as slow as all hell. For the most part it works. It has that movie's terrific Gallic dystopian aesthetic and atmosphere, but unfortunately most of the character graphics aren't up to scratch. Miette, who you control throughout the game, is the exception to this rule, with memory and time clearly taken to craft her in finer detail. A good thing really, given that fact obviously you'll be staring at her for the duration of the playthrough. City of Lost Children was clearly influenced by the alone-in-the-dark action-adventure titles, with Resident Evil-style tank controls used to steer your precocious nipper as she sets out on her quest, initially as an exploited child thief and then as a societal saviour. The pre-rendered maps are relatively cramped, and despite initially looking quite daunting when you start the game, the starkly vivid yet somberly coloured environments can be learned very quickly. Not that you'll be spending a lot of time in these sparsely populated streets. The game itself can be finished pretty quickly as it's very compact, not only in its play area but in its length. The puzzles are where the game's true challenge lies, but not really, for good reasons. There's items scattered throughout, but they're not displayed in the pre-rendered world. They appear in box outs when you stand in a particular area and face in a particular way. This forces you to nudge your tearaway preteen until she catches sight of the object again that she just saw very briefly appear in her vision. Similarly, you have to use the same janky precise positioning to utilise the equipment in the correct area. Fortunately, there's very little in the way of game fail states, other than getting caught by Miet's tormentors. If you get caught 3 times, then you end up being hurled into a punishment basement. You can get out the first couple of times, but after that, you'll be trapped forever. Children trapped in a basement? Something about Joseph Fritzl can be inserted there, if you like. The big downside of this is, despite this being the only fail state you can achieve, you're thrown into it from the very beginning. The controls aren't very responsive, and you'll be wrestling with simply just opening the door you need to get out due to the game's requirement for precise positioning. If you fail to escape the room in less than 30 seconds, then you will be thrown into the basement and lose one of your, well, I guess you could call them lives. Not a particularly great start to the game, thanks to those dodgy controls. Anytime you try and use anything in the wrong area, Miet will say a number of over-repeated phrases of frustration as you wrestle with the controls, like she's throwing a tantrum or something, and probably you will be on the other side of the screen. The game also requires you to do things in a very specific order. Some characters will not allow you access to key items unless you've talked to another character first, say, and some areas are sealed off. It would be nicer if you could collect all the parts you needed in advance, but I guess in a way it streamlines the game because the game's puzzles can be a little bit, let's say, esoteric. This is definitely a tradition in early games of this type. Even the best point-and-click adventures like Monkey Island sometimes were a little bit nonsensical with their solutions. How do you access this electrified cabinet, for instance? Well, it's quite simple. You turn on the light, and then the brush that you found in a nearby alleyway alcove can be put on the cash register on the other side of the room, which then turns off the electricity. Right, okay. Looking at these sort of games now, it's very easy to criticise them with modern eyes, but the original Resident Evil, as clunky as it feels, in its first form came out the same year, and well, it definitely had a better grasp of user-friendly control and object interaction. I mean, that circular amulet probably goes in the circular amulet-shaped dent in Resident Evil, as opposed to randomly putting a brush on a cash register to stop electricity going through an office cupboard. With all these criticisms said, it's not an irredeemably bad game. It's got a bucket load of weird atmosphere comparable to that of the otherworldly eeriness found in the classic Ecstatica, one of my favourites, and it's got a unique Gallic charm about it. I don't hate City of Lost Children because I was expecting most of its egregious issues because, well, most games of this type, in this genre, at this time, were like this. It's sort of priced in. CVG criticised the City of Lost Children for Miet's sluggish speed and the shortness of the adventure in their April 1997 issue. GamePro magazine said that those who have seen the movie will no doubt enjoy the City of Lost Children more than other gamers, but they reckoned even those players may find the play too tough. They gave it a 60% in their April 1997 edition. Finally, IGN said that the game seems illogical. It's never clear what you're supposed to do next, and you'll find yourself stuck with no clue more often than not. Even if you've seen the movie, you may find yourself bewildered and confused. Well, that's the review done, and I managed to get through the whole of it without making a single Maddie joke. City of Lost Children. Pray deluge, eh? Yeah, it wasn't worth it, was it?
Camera 7 tilt up. Ready, cold green. Stand by. Stand by 50. Stand by the lights. Camera 6 pan right. And action.
It's been a while since I dragged my rump across the canvas of the WWE game library, and I've decided to play WWF Smackdown 2 on my return. Why? Well, it was the most excited I've been to play a WWE game since the days of WrestleFest, and it probably remains the most excited I've been since. I used to get hyped up about dashing home to play through a Royal Rumble as, say, Taz or Stevie Richards, or unlocking another hidden character in season mode. What an exciting life I had in my early 20s. That's living all right. I haven't played Smackdown 2 since the third one came out on the PlayStation 2. And I started wondering to myself recently, I wonder if it's any good today. I used to play that game a lot. In fact, I put more hours into that game than any other game on the PlayStation 1 except for maybe ISS Pro 98 or Final Fantasy 7. I must admit I was very nervous to play it. I mean, what if it's aged about as well as all those old storylines about Vincent Kennedy McMahon being an old pervert? Man, we all thought he was just a good method actor. Before I look at the game itself, I'd like to take a look at the journey that got me to Smackdown 2 and just why I felt unsatisfied by every WWE effort outside of the Techno's arcade pair of WWF WrestleFest and WWF Superstars up until Smackdown 2's release. I mean, long story short, most of those games were absolute trash. But I need to get my watch hours up, and that won't needlessly pad out the video, will it? I have covered many of these games already. My path to the PlayStation 1's pinnacle of WWF game enjoyment from WrestleFest was long, taking in Ocean Spectrum WWF WrestleMania, WrestleMania Challenge on the NES, WWF Superstars on the Game Boy, Royal Rumble on the SNES, WrestleMania, the arcade game, and those Riseable Attitude and Warzone games by Acclaim. That last pair of games sunk me into such a deep depression that only the stroking of 15 kittens could possibly make me feel okay to face the day. And as I had a face that cats just don't like, most days were drawn out and miserable. Some of the games I've just mentioned had their fans, and I can understand that. But the accessibility of WWF Smackdown 2, and to a lesser degree its direct prequel, was an enticing prospect. The Acclaim games made it very hard for the beginner to pull off moves, and, well, they just left me cold. Not only that, but the Smackdown games had a huge, massive sandbox of different match opportunities that no other game could live up to. And yes, if you're wondering, I didn't play the N64 Aki games such as No Mercy, WrestleMania 2000 or the WCW games until much, much later. And yeah, they were probably better. WWF Smackdown 2 and my love of it was no doubt helped by what was very much a wrestling renaissance part of my life. I dropped off wrestling through my teens before Channel 4 presented it right in my face when they started showing episodes of WWF Heat on Sunday mornings. I could tell instantly that the product was a lot different from when I last saw it in the era of Hulk Hogan, The Ultimate Warrior and Randy Savage. The roughhousery of Stone Cold Steve Austin, the cocksure promo magic coming out of The Rock's mouth, and that huge void on each flared nostril of Triple H. How could I resist? This was enticing telly. And being on Sunday mornings, I was watching it through hungover eyes. And yet, no matter what state I was in, it was appointment television for me. Channel 4 even showed the Royal Rumble that year, and an old lady showed everyone her spaniel's ears. And I don't mean the audio receptive organs of a dog. I had become enthralled with the WWE again, and that's not entirely due to the ageing sweater meat of a septuagenarian that I'd seen on the telly. And so I was back into wrestling, and looky here, there was the release of the PlayStation 1 Smackdown games at roughly that time too. What a joyous time indeed to rediscover American professional wrestling. The WWF at the time was at a very key moment in its history. Yes, it was about to lose the battle with the Panda Bear for the name, WWF, but it was on the cusp of beating its 90s rival WCW into the dirt. The calibre of talent was huge and impressive. As well as The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin, you've got Golden Age legends like The Undertaker and the Big Boss Man. You've got young tag team show stealers like the Hardys, the Dudleys and Edge and Christian. You've got upper mid-card talent like Chris Jericho, Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit. Shh, no one mentioned Chris Benoit. And you've also got a smattering of divas like Trish, the Cat, Lita and Deborah. And they're all in this game. There's so many wrestlers in this game. But yeah, you probably won't play as the divas because this is before the women's wrestling revolution. So most of them just fight like they've had too many Bacardi breezers outside of a nightclub on a Friday night. It's all scratching and slapping and hair pulling with these ladies. No, unfortunately in this game they don't have the wrestling chops of a Becky Lynch or a Bull Nakano. Sorry about that. These wrestlers can battle over a never before seen vast array of gimmick matches that will be enough to make Jim Cornette, who notoriously hates gimmick matches, pull this face. As well as standard one-on-ones and tag team struggles, there are special referee matches, there are furniture terrorising battles involving tables, ladders and chairs. You can stick a fella in a coffin before he's dead. I mean, that's premature, isn't it? Take that man out the coffin, wait for him to die, put him back in. There's a survival mode named after one of Jim Ross's favourite nonsense sayings, the slobber knocker, which doesn't cast you as Vince McMahon avoiding lawyers as he dribbles down an intern's baby feeders. We've got a cage match, and if that isn't fancy enough, a Hell in a Cell match which puts an extra bit of cage on the roof and you can jump off that roof like you're Mankind or something. Fancy losing a tooth? Knock yourself out, literally. And if being 20 foot away from the ring up isn't enough, well, you can then get as far away from the canvas as you like by fighting in a vast array of backstage areas with interactive scenery with which you can pretend to cave in a fella's skull. What larks! There's also a variety of handy blunt objects to be found all over the arena should your knuckles not feel like a violent enough option to remove teeth from your opponent's mouth. The mode I loved the most, though, was indeed my favourite event of the year, that being the WWF Royal Rumble. That glorious chaos that involves 30 men on the roster seeing who can survive the longest. It is here where I finally scratched that itch of near a decade earlier, a decent, accessible and exciting Royal Rumble mode that you could play at home. Yes, Royal Rumble on the 16-bits had a Royal Rumble mode, as did those horrendous Acclaim games, but this was the section of the game that finally made me give that Robert Redford nod to WrestleFest and say to it, "That'll do, pig, that'll do. Thank you, my friend, you can rest now." Not that I'd actually played it much since about 1993, because it was, an arcade game, and I don't live in an arcade. As well as the individual matches, which in itself will give you hours of enjoyment, there is the season mode, where you wrestle through a couple of years of WWE programming, fighting through 2 nights of weekly shows and a monthly pay-per-view. This mode is the meat of the game and is packed with cutscenes and unlockable content and characters like Billy Gunn, Mankind and Shawn Michaels, and because we're back in 2001, you unlock these characters by playing the game and not paying for them. Wonders never cease. God damn it, time. And in season mode, what else do you get? Lots and lots of loading screens. Each of the cast has a picture, and even though there's a lot of them, you'll tire of them soon enough. Should it be that one of S.A. Rios looking like he's concentrated on his bowel movements and ultimately failed doing so, or Trish Stratus having her bum cheeks on the wrong side of her body and a bit too high up. And the loading screens seem to hang around forever. And in season mode, these loading screens are joined by their friends, the loading bars. Your average show will usually see you compete in one match, and you can either watch the matches and incur more loading screens, or you can skip the matches, which don't do anything nice like instantly skip. No, instead they decide to put 2 energy bars together in a race to avoid extinction. This in itself takes a chunk of time. Time you can spend farting, looking at pictures of bakeries, or sticking a cocktail stick in your urethra. I know what I'd rather be doing, sticking a cocktail stick in my urethra. I'm showing this in real time. This is me playing through an episode of Smackdown. And you have to do this for 6 matches, 2 shows a week, without counting the pay-per-views. It's long and it's not fun, and you'll be seeing the same cutscenes throughout season mode a lot too. You can pick any wrestler you've unlocked and even swap mid-season to a different grappler if you so wish. This adds a bit of variety to the proceedings, and you can enter as a creator wrestler too. Here I've made Richard Madeley, the British TV presenter who is essentially Alan Partridge made flesh. Yes, even more so than Steve Coogan is. Not only can you create a wrestler, but you can also create stables, pay-per-views, managers and movesets. In terms of character customization, it's an extremely large step from the sparse options from the first Smackdown. But it won't impress you much, Shania Twain, if you're used to anything WWE related from the PlayStation 2 up. This is indicative of much of the game as a whole. It's a developing, evolving franchise at this stage, yet to hit its stride. It would be a further generation and a couple of games until it did. After that, it just stands still, and you realise that the franchise probably isn't as good as Fire Pro Wrestling World. Well, the nascent nature of a franchise on its way up extends to the gameplay. It's very quick and easy to pick up the controls, with context-sensitive attacks, and you can control your moves by pressing one of the attack or grappling buttons and a direction which gives you different moves. There's a fair amount, but not that many moves per wrestler. Additionally, there isn't a lot of difference in terms of strength or speed between the characters. Stephanie McMahon can body slam Viscera without pulling a muscle in her slender back, and Rikishi can leap with just as much gay abandon as Jeff Hardy in his young pomp. It is a very arcadey wrestling game. Throwing another wrestler off the top of a Hell in a Cell or hitting them with a chair will see them stay down for approximately 0.5 of a second. Graphically, it's very PlayStation 1. It's a machine trying its best to bring the excitement of sports entertainment to your 32-bit wonder. It's polygonal eyesorage in the 2020s, alright, and there are notable cut corners with things like cardboard crowds and wrestlers not so much walking to the ring but trying to escape their intro videos that are following them like demons from hell. With that said, it's bright, it's vibrant, it's colourful fare, and it's a country mile from the atmosphere-free dark underpasses that seem to make up the arenas in WWF's Attitude and Warzone. In terms of sound, there's no commentary as yet. You don't get that until the PlayStation 2. However, you do get a range of the era macho guitar churn posturing. You can make your own commentary up if you like. Do your best, JR. Reviews of the game were pretty glowing for the time. IGN said if Smackdown 2 is going to be the last wrestling game on the PlayStation 1, no one will be liable to be disappointed in what they get when they pick it up. They gave it an 8.9 out of 10 in November 2000. GameSpot in November 2000 said WWF SmackDown 2 presents an excellent package, but you can't help but feel any real innovations have been sacrificed to get the game on the shelves before consumers leave the PlayStation 1 for the newer formats. That's fair enough. I can see why I love SmackDown 2 Know Your Role. It was so much better than any WWE game that came out on a home computer or console at that point. No, I'm not ignoring you, N64. Come here, let me give you a good belly rub. Are the PS1 games as good today? Absolutely not. No Mercy, WCW vs NWO, the Fire Pro games, and even the Technos arcade games have aged much better than the two SmackDown games on the PlayStation 1. They are a moment in wrestling game history though, a moment of vivid nostalgia, a fond memory for me up there with Hogan slamming Andre, Tyson punching Michaels, Austin beating The Rock, Lesnar finally defeating The Undertaker and his WrestleMania undefeated streak. If SmackDown 2 really wants to know its role, well, its role is the same as the most memorable gaming memories I have of the PlayStation 1 era. But as those lyrics said in that song that they played when Ric Flair was beaten by Shawn Michaels in his WWF retirement match, leave the memories alone. So know your role and shut the hell up.
Come on, this way to the test track.
You see, you've got to admire Hooters in a way. There's a certain brazen honesty to that business model. Yes, they sell beer and chicken wings, but that's not why they're still going. We all know what it is, don't we? Yes, of course, it's the fact they put their name to this game in 2002, obviously. Everyone loved Hooters Road Trip, didn't they? Everyone was playing it up and down the country from Southampton to the goddamn Outer Hebrides. And that's not just here as well. In America, it was huge, that game. All those Game of the Year awards it won, all the sequels, the HD remasters on the PlayStation 2, 3, 4, 5, the hit movie based on it, the Hooters Road Trip theme park. We all remember... Well, no, we don't. Yes, it's the tits. That's why Hooters is popular. It's tits. Huge, wobbly mammary glands, full of milk and fun times. But yes... Hooters then. What's the missive behind the mammaries, the tale behind the tatties, the yarn behind the yams? Hooters was formed 39 years ago in the year of our Lord, who probably doesn't approve, of 1983. It was founded by 6 businessmen on April Fool's Day because the 6 men were convinced it was going to fail. They clearly had too much faith in men. They opened their first restaurant in Clearwater, Florida on the site of an old rundown nightclub, a venue that had numerous failed businesses in it. Despite this seemingly defeatist attitude and conviction that bad luck was coming their way, Hooters turned out to be a storming success. How big a success? Well, as of 2023, there are 430 Hooters restaurants across 28 countries. The business model is this: open a restaurant with a bar and have all the waiting staff be young women in their late teens, their 20s or their early 30s and be of an attractive nature. Then they clad them in the signature orange hot pants and a very tight white t-shirt emblazoned with the company logo of an owl, because owls hoot and breasts are known as Hooters. Sex sells, and in this case, sex sells chicken wings. Business was so good that in the early 2000s, Hooters even started a Pan-American airline business, and I'm sure you can guess how some of the air hostesses were dressed. It didn't last that long though. But the restaurant business, now split into two companies, continues to thrive, even after COVID, and despite the chain having understandably constant legal issues related to employment discrimination, sexual harassment, and the perceived objectification of its staff. The most famous lawsuit is unquestionably related to waitress Jodie Berry at the Panama City Beach venue. Berry was the winner of a beer sales contest, a contest that promised a Toyota as a prize. When the prize was handed over, Jodie was nonplussed, as instead of getting a top-of-the-range Toyota vehicle, she was handed a toy Yoda. I mean, I find that pretty funny, but Miss Berry clearly didn't, and neither in the end did her manager or the Hooters franchisee when they had to settle out of court. What a boob, eh? So, onto the game. Picture the scene, if you will. It is the space year 2002, and Ubisoft are preparing to launch a game on the PS1 and the PC called Freewheelin' USA. Freewheelin' USA, programmed by Hoplite Research, had you taking part in a series of races across various US states in different cars. So a bit like Cruising USA. A bit like Cruising USA if it wasn't very good at all. Some bright spark at Ubisoft realised that they might lose some dollar on this and put it out on their budget label. But they realised that might not be enough. So it was quietly released on the PC. And for the PlayStation 1, well, there was only one option: to press the nuclear button. And that nuclear button had an areola and nipples. You see, the late 90s and early 2000s were the peak of lad culture across the Western world. Sex comedies like American Pie and Road Trip were doing big money at the cinema. Magazines like Nuts and Loaded were softcore pamphlets of grot. But you know what? Hollyoaks actresses had to have a side hustle, and OnlyFans was not an option at that point. Games weren't immune to this sort of exploitation either. Dave Mirra's bike-based Tony Hawk's-alike franchise saw him exit Toot Sweet when Acclaim decided to strip off its female characters to their panties in BMX XXX in 2002. And in 2004, The Guy Game, a TV series in America, saw a PlayStation release that was very swiftly recalled when a 17-year-old showed off her goods that weren't ripened to US legality standards. Oh dear, you done a pedo. So Freewheelin' USA got some of that action too. The Hooters license was added to the mix, and frankly, you can see the joins. Video clips of various waitresses, both at work
Welcome to the Lone Star State. In case you didn't notice, everything here is just plain bigger.
and apparently enjoying a trip to the local beach.
Nice racing, champ. You finished this road trip in record time.
Were added between races. And not a lot else. There's the odd loading screen. There's a lady posing on the menu. I guess that's about it. And the beach scenes make me think that there's poor middle-aged men who had to go and get their own chicken wings from that particular branch of Hooters on that day. Get back to work, loves. So yes, the Hooters license feels very last minute, and art files exist that show that Hooters Road Trip was indeed previously called Freewheelin' USA on the PlayStation before it got released. And then they re-released the PC version with the Hooters license on it as well. The cheeky thieving gits. Don't worry, just because you see the same video clips of waitresses awkwardly talking about their home states every single time you play a level, it doesn't get annoying at all. And no, that isn't the sound of my teeth grinding. Nuh-uh.
Hey there! Welcome to Jacksonville.
But yes, what you see here is what you get. The Hooters license no doubt persuaded a few fellas to part with their money, but they're not going to see anything beyond this. And to be fair, I think that's par for the course with Hooters. Occasionally they might get into bikinis, but they're not going to strip off in the nuddy while they serve you spiced wings. Imagine if droplets of hot sauce got on your punani. That wouldn't be great. So the game. Is it as bad as the thin veneer of mild titillation being hurriedly applied to it in order to sell copies? Yeah, it is. How bad? Oh, well, Game Informer described it as one of the worst games of all time, and it was the 49th worst game of all time according to Games Radar in 2017. So yeah, not brilliant, but what's so bad about it? Well, I mean, the graphics and the music aren't brilliant, but to be fair, I think they're better aspects of the game. The controls, you see, they're a little bit sensitive. I mean, when I say a little bit sensitive, they're sensitive as in they're prone to having a panic attack when confronted with oxygen or the ground kind of sensitive. They're very sensitive. I got through the game by minutely touching left and right, as if I was a butterfly stroking a rose petal. If you don't do that, you'll be careering into cars and fences and all sorts. And let me tell you, it is very easy to crash into fences in this game, as the roads are extraordinarily narrow, with very little room to overtake either your opponents or the traffic around you. You'll be struggling and a-cussing, and if you were playing this game in a Hooters bar, the waitresses would immediately be getting security to remove you for being a threatening, scary, sweary pants. Let me tell you that. It's hard to describe how frustrating this game is to control, but if you've ever had one of those jobs in retail that involves moving around those trolleys that have usually full with either trash or boxes, you'll know that getting it through a narrow passageway is pretty difficult. It feels like that, only you've paid for this and it's supposed to be entertainment. Now, you look like someone who enjoys misery. I hope you don't mind me saying. You've got that look about you. It's ill-favoured, but you know what? You rock it. So how would you like that misery compounded even further? How about traffic that will seemingly deliberately move in your way when you try and overtake, and will, with the help of the terrible draw distance, appear out of nowhere and slam right into you with no chance of avoidance when coming towards you on the road? It is horrible. This game is horrible. It's one of the worst racing games I've ever played in my life. There's no collision damage on your vehicle either, despite the cars all being made up, so there's no Gran Turismo laws. And while we're on the subject of Gran Turismo, let's not forget that this game came out in 2002. 2002, after things like Gran Turismo, Wipeout, Driver, the Ridge Racer series, Need for Speed series, they were all out. They're all much better than this game. And no, I don't think the budget price excuses it. The game is broken. It's a broken game. And if you bought, I don't know, a plate from Wilco, and then you opened the bag and you saw that it was chipped, you'd take it back, wouldn't you? I don't believe there's any excuse for it, to be honest. And it's a dull, throbbing, repetitive slog that required me multiple saves to get through. I would play through a level of 6 stages of racing and then go off and do something else. I mean, it's quite clever that it's both really boring and rage-inducing at the same time. That is a strange feeling to have, but it is a feeling I had playing this. Its place as being one of the poorest titles in the PlayStation's history is well earned. Or poorly earned, because it's not really earning anything by being bad. I don't know. But no amount of 6-second clips of waitresses in their early 20s saying place names.
Hi, y'all. Welcome to Georgia. How you doing, sugar?
Is going to alter my opinion on this. The patrons of Hooters having a sad cry wank in their lonely flats when they get home will be having a far better time than you if you are playing this game. IGN gave it a miserable 2 out of 10 in May 2002. They said, "Want pretty girls happy to be exploited? Turn on MTV. Want gameplay? Turn on anything else." GameSpot reviewed it on April the 9th, 2002 and said that the Hooters restaurants describe themselves as delightfully tacky, yet unrefined. But here is a game that could do with a dose of refinement, as it is sorely needed here. A 2.5 out of 10 was given to Hooters Road Trip from them. A good way to make yourself feel old is with a property that had its first flush of popularity significantly after your childhood had had its revival 20 years later. And that revival has now gone to 5 years before this video. Christ, I feel old. And you know what? The baby that played the original son in the Teletubbies now has children. I feel like that fella in The Last Crusade, I swear. So yes, the incomprehensible for all but the most stoned adults show, and babies of course, from the late 90s had a PlayStation game along with a lot of other toddler-pleasing merch. But before we warm up the grey box of tricks, no doubt by flipping it over onto its lid as the bugger's laser refuses to work anymore, let's look at the all too recent history of that felt-covered biotechno Cronenbergian nightmare troupe of simpleton ogres, the Teletubbies. The year is 1997. The hunger of toddlers and babies to be entertained by the television can no longer be sated by just Fireman Sam, Postman Pat, Thomas the Tank Engine or Tots TV. Again, and it's important to remember this to make you feel old, is that babies born in 1997, by the way, were people like Maisie Williams, Marcus Rashford and Kylie Jenner. I am so old. Well, creators Anne Wood and Andrew Davenport decided they were going to sate that hunger for entertainment, and they pitched an idea about some astronaut-looking characters on a moon-like landscape, which would be brightened up and covered in colourful weather, fauna and fabrics. After some development, the Teletubbies was born and placed on the CBBC morning slot on BBC Two, because remember, CBBC used to be a segment rather than its own channel. There was initially quite a large backlash against the furry invaders when it nicked the Playdays spot, as adults just didn't get it. Teletubbies was very unconventional at the time. It was wordless, it was big on colours, it was big on repetition. There were no human hosts, just these 4 childlike goofs of varying heights, all bumbling about, hugging and falling over. Sort of like the late stages of a middle-aged hen do, essentially only with less endless dirty jokes and inflatable winkles going about. The only human interaction happens when the quartet gather on the mound near the wind turbine, at which point the eponymous tellies on the Tubbies will kick in and footage of children existing and over-gurning for the camera will play for 2 minutes. Given that it's footage of children and the Teletubby displaying this footage on its stomach starts convulsing in either pleasure or pain, well, I don't know, I just find it a little bit uncomfortable to watch. Another unsettling presence is that of the farting periscope, which acts as a sort of a prison warden, telling them when they can leave their enclosure and when they have to go to bed. The whole thing is an absolute Eldritchian nightmare when you start to think about it, or in my case overthink about it, as I'm known to do. But to those who still defecate where they sit and drink direct from a tit, it's gripping stuff. It was a absolute mega hit, despite parents initially not getting it. You see, their children did. It was a hit not just in the UK but worldwide. It was shown in 120 countries. There were in-depth debates about the sexuality of Tinky Winky by academics and TV show hosts just because he walked around with a handbag. Students adopted it because they did that really annoying, "Oh, they must have been on drugs when they made this," lol thing that every generation seems to do in that really annoying manner with children's shows. And they shifted an absolute load of merch. There was a UK #1 single. Yeah, I know. And Teletubbies is still the most lucrative show the BBC has ever made in terms of its merchandise. Yes, even more than that fella in the TARDIS. It is estimated that an incredible £1 billion has been made from merch revenue by the year 2020 on this Teletubbies property. Teletubbies has won BAFTAs and other awards. It has had a remake series that ran from 2015 to 2018. It was unquestionably an edutainment monolith for the under fives. They had a uniqueness about them in the 1990s. It is a uniqueness that has been copied quite a lot since, with In the Night Garden probably being the most successful of the shows that aped its style. So being that successful, it did of course have several computer games, including this one on the most beloved console of the day, the PlayStation 1. Play with the Teletubbies was released on the PC first in 1998, and then it made the move across the PS1 in 1999, courtesy of BBC Multimedia in the PAL regions and Knowledge Adventure in the North American territories. It was developed by Asylum, who, unsurprisingly, do not have their name featured on the front of the box of this game, firmly aimed at very young children who won't know what an Asylum is and probably shouldn't yet. You see, the market for the PS1 was altering at this point. In its first couple of years, the console was aimed at a young adult market, the first console to be aimed at that market rather than adolescent males. But by 1999, excitement for the next generation was building. The Dreamcast had come out in 1999 and the PS2, well, that wasn't far down the pipeline. So young, late Generation X adults would soon be passing on the old grey slab to the millennial generation, the son, the daughter, the younger sibling, and so a lot more games aimed at a younger market started to appear on Sony's machine. Teletubbies was at the extreme furthest end of that market, that being the toddler. The game starts with the 4 characters on the hill, and a button press will select which of the pudgy protagonists you will play as. Once the character is selected, you can explore the confines of the garden left to right, or indeed right to left. And not to worry, you can't walk off into the wilderness and into the maw of whatever preys on the gang in Tubbyland. The screen will simply loop if you walk more than 3 or 4 screens over. Several objects will flash along the playfield, which when approached will take your tubby into a particular activity, which can be repeated as many times as you see fit once you've played it. Walking into the foreground will see you enter the house, which is covered in technology that likely does absolutely nothing, and you can enter an encounter with Nunu the Hoover, who will swallow the tubby tustard that you've ejaculated all over the place after getting a little bit too excited. Walk into the background from the outside grassy compound though, and you'll start a character unique video sequence featuring children who now have mortgages and some grey hairs probably, engaging in all sorts of children-based tomfoolery. You can swap characters between activities. Not a great deal is massively different if you do, barring the aforementioned clips and the occasional object interaction. How do you finish Teletubbies? Well, you simply press start, then select, and then the Tubbies are commanded to turn it in for the night by that farting periscope. And so, what does this actually play like? Well, it doesn't. Not really. It has the hint of gameplay, but it's more of a sprinkling. You really just sort of walk about, accessing the mini activities. You press a few buttons to interact with them, and then you move on to the next one. or repeat it again when the tubby says, again, again. There's not many of these. You can see them all in 30 minutes. And they're all as short as most of the people who've played this when it came out. But it's important to realise why. It reminds me a lot of the Orm and Cheap game on the Spectrum. The interaction is barely there because it's not aimed at you or me. It's aimed at the very, very young. You're not going to be pulling off a spinning pile driver on old Ditzy with La La here. It's basically a more sophisticated version of a DVD menu, and that's exactly what it needs to be. It was extensively playtested by little folk in nappies, and they liked it, and that's the end result. You can't argue with that. As such, it fulfills what it set out to do. Kids of that age will watch movies multiple times. It doesn't even matter that there's not many activities. It exists as its own thing, not a video game but a media package for the sort of folk who bang their heads on the corners of tables. Now, to an adult, it's complete drivel and a rip-off, but I can assure you I have spent 0% of today in a baby bouncer or chewing a plastic ring. That's tomorrow. To rate it as a game is to miss the point. And miss the point the official PlayStation magazine truly did indeed do. They probably didn't get the concept when they gave it a 1 out of 10 in March 2000 in the UK edition of their magazine. And yes, this is from Wikipedia, as I couldn't find it on the Internet Archive. Internet Archive, you let me down for once, and I'm very disappointed. To summarise then, if you're an adult, there is literally nothing for you here unless you like doing ironic YouTube reviews. Whereas if you're a late 90s toddler, you'll probably love it. So, are you? Hi, how are you a toddler from the late 90s in 2023? You okay? Good. But yeah, if you're an adult and you really want to try a edutainment game meant for children, try Shoe People on the Spectrum, Benji on the Commodore 64, or one of the Carmen Sandiego games on the 8 or 16 bits. They'll teach you about geography. That'd be good, wouldn't it? Or don't. Uh-oh.
The weakest link. Goodbye.
Being paid a TV presenter's wage to be mean to members of the public. That truly is a dream job, isn't it? Anne Robinson must sit back in her chair sometimes and wistfully think to herself, how on earth did I get away with that? Every day a fresh batch of slack-jawed yokels would parade themselves in front of this curt Duracell battery and take this abuse all for half an hour of Z-tier fame and a 1 in 7 chance of winning about $5,000 tops. Such fools. Unfortunately, the Weakest Link game doesn't let you act as Anne, firing withering insults at people for not knowing that wombat's poo is in a cube shape, or that Saffron was the lead singer of 1990s band Republica. That would truly be the perfect game, no doubt successful enough for a yearly franchise like John Madden or Call of Duty. Instead, we have to play as this squadron of working-class goofs instead. Not only did you come here to be insulted, but you paid Activision for the privilege. What do we know about the Weakest Link then, aside from it being an emasculating experience? Well, let me pour history in your ears. It gloops like custard. The quiz show had seen a bit of a renaissance in Europe in the late 1990s, thanks to the water cooler chat magnet Who Wants To Be a Millionaire? Envious of ITV's success with their version of that show, the BBC Brain Trust got busy trying to invent something similar but legally distinct. Familiar ingredients were in place. They were stirred into this quizzical goulash. You had a dark studio, a charismatic host, tense music, swooping dramatic lights, and high levels of psychological stress. The BBC brought us this first in that favourite year of Jarvis Cocker's, the year 2000. The concept for the game is fairly straightforward. A group of contestants answer questions one after the other sequentially, which builds up a cash ladder. At any point before a question is asked, the player being asked the question can bank the money, which resets the ladder. If a contestant gets a question wrong without banking, the unbanked money raised so far is lost. At the end of each timed round, the contestants vote to evict who they consider to be the weakest link. However, this is open to abuse. If someone is particularly smart, they may find themselves ousted by the grasping, sneaky other participants who see them as a threat to getting their hands on that filthy, filthy money. It's like Game of Thrones, but with less regal gowns, dragons and tits. The remaining 2 finalists left have a quizzical penalty shootout to see who takes home the money all the contestants have squirreled away, and then you can go and get on with your early 2000s evening, be that watching Big Brother, listening to new metal, or playing Tekken Tag Tournament on your brand new PS2. The Weakest Link was an enormous success, with its initial UK run lasting from 2000 until 2012, when Robinson decided to hang up her snark gun and her belittleization hat. Like a serial killer at the end of a horror film, it refused to remain dead and made a return to the BBC in 2021, hosted now by lazy-eyed self-deprecator Roman Ranganathan. Across the world, Weakest Link was as big a success, with the show's concept distributed across the globe, second only to Who Wants To Be a Millionaire in the countries reached by a quiz franchise. Often, the strict headmistress act was copied by the other versions too. Anne even did a stint in America herself, and they loved getting ripped to shreds, the absolute red, white and blue perverts. After the Who Wants To Be a Millionaire game released by Eidos sold more copies than cakes at a fat person convention, Activision realised there was money to be made in minimal programming effort of a primetime quiz turned video game, and picked option 2 on the selection menu. That second option was this. Obviously, I'm not talking about going for gold, am I? It came out on the PlayStation 1 and PC worldwide, and it had a version on the PS2 that was only released in Europe. I'm going to cover the PS1 version today, partly because it's the biggest seller, partly because it's the easiest to emulate, and also because it's the jankiest, therefore the funniest version. Released in the same year as the Tarrant-fronted title, it was programmed by Lego Game Factory line Traveller's Tales, before they started all that bricking about. The Weakest Link is a very literal version of the show. Why, it's as accurate as a cloned bee that spent night after night copying the mannerisms of the bee it's based on, and presents the action via FMV cutscene and voiceover. There's a perfectly low-res 3D interpretation of the TV studio, and you've got all the dramatic stop-start music all bolted onto an exact recreation of each round of the show. At the start of the proceedings, because you can't be present on your PlayStation disc in person, you'll have to choose from a variety of bloody British people being all British and that. Now follows a sequence where they all introduce themselves and I'll make horrible generalisations based on absolutely nothing apart from these little sentences they say.
I'm Angela, 43, a local government officer from Norwich. I like long walks in the countryside and watching the birds in the garden.
Hi, I'm Karen. I'm 25 and I'm a secretary from Romford in Essex. I like meeting with friends, watching television and shopping.
My name is Steve. I am 37 years old and I am a police constable based in Northampton. My interests include studying motor repairs and the history of the steam engine.
I'm Gary, 21. I'm a graduate living in Bristol. I'm into martial arts, movies and clubbing with my mates.
I'm Nicholas, 45, a commodities trader from Chalfont St Giles in Buckinghamshire. I'm keenly interested in current affairs and would like to get involved in both national and local politics.
Hiya, I'm Tony, I'm 39 and I'm a recruitment consultant from Chichester. I'm into adventure sports, cycling and quizzes of all sorts.
I'm Austin, age 41 from Walsall. I'm a civil servant. I take a strong interest in local politics and I write for my local paper.
I'm Jenny, I'm 31 and I'm a receptionist. I live in Guildford in Surrey. I like going out, movies, makeovers and manicures. Hello, I'm Maeve, I'm 28 and I'm a barmaid from Cork. I love watching old movies, playing all types of sport and having a good time with my friends.
Yeah, hi, I'm Lucinda. I'm 39. I run a catering business in Kensington. My pastimes are the countryside, riding and organising charity events.
I'm Kate, 22. I'm a medical student at Edinburgh University. I'm fascinated by all fields of science, but take an interest in the arts and current affairs as well.
Right, I'm Jez. I'm 16, I'm doing my GCSEs. I live in Longfield in Kent. I'm into skateboarding, action films and all types of techno music.
I'm Samantha, I'm 20, I'm a retail manager. I come from Taunton. My hobbies are jogging, staying fit and taking my Labradors for long walks in the countryside.
Hello, my name's Eddie and I'm 42. I live in Warrington and I'm a long-distance haulier. I'm interested in all forms of general knowledge and love competing in pub quizzes.
I'm Lorraine, I'm 40 and I'm a PE teacher in Glasgow. I love all sports, both playing and spectating, and go to watch Scotland whenever I can.
My name is Arthur, I'm 66 and I'm a retired bank manager from Hove. I enjoy watching television, especially current affairs programmes, and like visiting the countryside whenever I can.
I'm Barry, 38, and I'm a London cabbie from Catford, South London. I like DIY, travelling abroad, and watching Crystal Palace.
I'm Ravi, age 24, and I'm a trainee accountant living in Leicester. I play football with the local Sunday League team, and I like going to the cinema in my spare time.
I'm Rose. I'm 59 and I'm a housewife and grandmother from Luton. My hobbies are gardening, watching nature programmes and embroidery.
Hiya, I'm Jules, I'm 21 and I'm studying fashion design at St Martin's College London. I'm into visual and performance art, travel and anything connected to fashion.
My name is Sarah, I'm 47 and I'm a journalist. I live in Harrogate. I love meeting and talking with new people and reading society and fashion magazines.
Hello, I'm Sapphire. I'm 38 and I'm an interior designer from Oxford. I love socialising with friends, keeping fit, and all things physical.
I'm Tim, I'm 29, I'm a programmer from Beaconsfield in Buckinghamshire. I'm also interested in steam engines and native British birds.
I'm William, age 35. I'm an air traffic controller living in Redhill. I love reading and I'm interested in landscape photography and DIY.
Cheers guys, thanks for coming. Sorry I insulted you all, and I'm sure the real people are nothing like that. Then the game plays out exactly as it does on the telly, albeit with a multiple choice interface rather than you actually having to know anything. This can be adjusted for difficulty though. Children and stupid people can pick the junior setting, where the answers are reduced to 2 options. Easy, where that is expanded to 4 options, and normal, where only the first couple of letters of each answer are displayed. In terms of the questions, I suppose it's the best interpretation they could have managed on a PlayStation 1, so fair enough. The difficulty also likely affects the amount that your opponents know, how often they bank, and how long they dither. That was my experience of the 3 modes, but I could be wrong. It happens way too frequently these days. The game is paced identically to that of the show, meaning that you'll be playing for the best part of half an hour per game. Unless you skip Anne's threatening FMV and voiceover put-down assaults on the gathered throng assembled in front of her, of course. The 3D model of Anne noticeably never faces you, and maybe she had that put in her contract after seeing the shifting, very PlayStation 1 polygonal horrors that make up her guests. They're a twitching, creepy group of oddities when represented in this digital form. Those faces will be seared into your brain forever. You're only with the crew for a short time, so you can forgive their one-note personalities that maintain throughout their invited stay at Anne's behest. When they're ejected from the proceedings by being named the weakest link, they will either bitch and moan like they're a wronged housewife, or they'll be extremely magnanimous and mea culpa about the whole thing. They all sound very Archer's actor asked to phone in something at the last minute though, if you know what I mean. You can stretch proceedings out with the championship mode, which adds longevity. In the show itself, there's not usually a repeat visit from the contestants. But in this mode, you can see if you can win 4 shows in a row like a big smarty pants. I know you can. I believe in you. Rather than save your progress, you're given a Konami-style code with which to input so you can resume your progress later on. That would be a long old stint sitting through 4 shows. There's a bend the rules option too, which lets you play around with settings like how many questions of a particular type you may get, how often the others bank, and other show affecting features. And that's about it really. It's a love letter to massive fans of the show, but hugely short-lived. The questions repeat a bit too quickly for my liking, and while the presentation is spot on, shifting Skinwalker contestants aside, it's a fairly bland looking show to begin with. It's another one of those games that is kind of limited by the source material. It's a perfect adaptation of that show, just not a very good, long-lasting video game. Fun for maybe 2 plays at best. Eurogamer gave it a 6 out of 10 in October 2001. They said if you had to choose between Who Wants To Be a Millionaire and The Weakest Link, neither is particularly remarkable, but they would probably recommend The Weakest Link. CMVG gave it a negative review in the same month. This sort of game sucks, but they sell loads because people who don't know games buy them. This is the kind of game your parents would buy, and that should say it all. A 4 out of 10 from them. IGN gave it a 3.5 and said, "You'll bore of this in less than a day's time. In fact, I'd wager even before lunch." So yes, thanks for joining me on that PlayStation memory traipse, if you will. And there are still some compilations to come. I am going to call it a day, I think, in a month, because I'm running out of videos to rehash and put on the channel. Yes, stay tuned. There are still more to come if you like watching the longer form version of them. And until then, like, subscribe, and thanks, bye.